C'est officiel, le Royaume-Uni confirme l'extradition de Julian Assange aux États-Unis.
C'est un jour sombre, mais pas le bout du chemin. Réaction des soutiens de Julian Assange rassemblés à New York ce vendredi.
Julian Assange est le fondateur de Wikileaks. Il y serait jugé aux États-Unis pour espionnage. Il risque 175 ans de prison là-bas.
Ce lanceur d'alerte est poursuivi pour une fuite massive de documents confidentiels.
Du 11 au 13 novembre dernier a eu lieu la 7e rencontre annuelle des lanceurs d'alerte à Saint-Denis. 70 intervenants et intervenantes, dont une particulière pour cette édition, Stella Assange, la femme du célèbre fondateur de Wikileaks. Nous en avons profité pour la rencontrer afin d'en savoir un peu plus sur l'état de santé de Julian Assange ainsi que des suites qui l'attendent.
The United States is charging Julian under the U.S. Espionage Act. He faces 175 years in prison, a potential sentence of 175 years.
The act essentially says that American secrets cannot be passed to anyone who is not authorized to receive them. Now, that's almost always in the history of the act been used against spies, but the Justice Department began using the Espionage Act against people who considered themselves to be whistleblowers.
He's being prosecuted for receiving information from a source, possessing that information and making it public through WikiLeaks and other partners like Le Monde. Yeah. And so he is being pursued for his work. In the United States, it's the first time they ever go after a publisher under the Espionage Act. There's no public interest defense. He can't say, well, I published this, but it was because it revealed war crimes and it revealed civilian killings and so on. If you define the crime as journalism, as journalistic activity, then Julian's guilty, as are journalists all over the world when they're publishing truths that have been covered up, that have been kept secret by the state because the state has committed them and has then covered them up. So he faces the rest of his life in prison. He faces dying in prison for doing his job, which was the most important work of journalism of our generation. Well, I fear that Julian will lose his life. And he's already suffered profoundly. He is suffering profoundly every single day.
L'état de santé très délabré dans lequel se trouve votre fils, John Shipton. Sa défense a insisté sur les risques de suicide en cas d'extradition, malgré les assurances de Washington sur le sort qui lui serait réservé. Est-ce que vous partagez cette crainte?
This is inarguable. Two specialist doctors went to the prison and examined Julian, and equally Niels Melzer was in their company and concluded that Julian was a victim of psychological torture, which was having detrimental physical effects. So, yes, I agree with it.
He's been in some form of confinement for 12 years. He was initially arrested on the 7th of December 2010. He spent 10 days in prison, then he was under house arrest for a year and a half, then he was forced into the embassy for 7 years, and then he was put into a high-security prison. He hasn't been a free man for 12 years, and he risks spending the rest of his life in prison. And it's not just about being imprisoned for the rest of his life. There have been plots to assassinate him. We learned last year in an investigative report that came out of the United States that Mike Pompeo, when he was the head of the CIA, was plotting Julian's assassination. He was asking his agency, the CIA, to present plans, specific plans and options and sketches of how to assassinate Julian.
In 2017, the CIA, which you were running at the time, plotted to kidnap Julian Assange and even discussed plans to assassinate him. True or false?
Makes for pretty good fiction, Megan. They should write such a novel. This is classic Isakov. I can't say much about this other than whoever those 30 people who allegedly spoke with one of these reporters, they should all be prosecuted for speaking about classified activity inside the Central Intelligence Agency.
Now, how can it possibly be that Julian is having to fight not to be extradited to the very country that was planning his assassination? The whole situation is completely absurd. It makes no sense whatsoever. It is the United States government that has taken revenge on a publisher because he embarrassed them. Well, Julian's health is deteriorating by the day. He's in a high-security prison in London.
Belmarsh Prison in southeast London, housing some of the country's most notorious criminals and terror suspects. Belmarsh's critics have dubbed it Britain's Guantanamo Bay.
Where he's been for over 3.5 years, and he has no reason to be there whatsoever. He's being kept there because the United States is trying to extradite him to face 175 years. His health, as you can imagine, being isolated over 20 hours a day in a single cell for years on end is deteriorating. And our biggest fear is that one day he'll have a full stroke or another health crisis, and no one will be there to treat him. So he could be. Julian is at risk every day of losing his life. Belmarsh is an underfunded, high-security prison. It's a terrible place for him to be. It's a terrible place for anyone to be, and he's not safe there because of the very poor standards that there are in that prison. But it's not just about Belmarsh. It's about the fact that he's in prison, which is what I want to draw attention to. It's not about moving him to a better prison. He shouldn't be in a prison in the first place. Well, I make him aware every day whenever, there's a song or there's an event like this or there's a huge protest like we had in London recently. We surrounded the Thames on both sides of the river in front of the Parliament. There's an incredible outpouring of support for Julian because there is increased awareness that he is a political prisoner, that he is at risk of losing his life. The film that Julian's brother has produced, Ithaca, is about our family's fight for Julian's freedom.
Julian Assange is the hero of our time.
He was the darling of the left. All of a sudden, he's a puppet of Russia.
My name is John Shipton. I'm Julian Assange's father.
WikiLeaks found that Julian Assange has been arrested.
One of the most notorious and controversial figures in custody.
The maximum jail sentence of 175 years.
Because he published the truth.
And it won the Audience Award in Berlin last month. It's now in New York City. So that the awareness is building. And that is essential in order to fight a political case. We need to have public awareness that this is a political case, that Julian is being pursued because he did the right thing, because he told the truth, and because he informed the public of the truth. It's hard for me to judge the media landscape in France. But the fact is that Julian is in prison right now because he did exactly what Le Monde did. And he did exactly what others who published alongside him did. He is no different. And this is, in fact, why the Obama administration said that they were not going to prosecute Julian over the Manning leaks because they could not differentiate him from, for example, Le Monde. That Julian is a publisher, he's not a hacker, that administration was not prepared to set a precedent through which they could go after the rest of the press. What I think the press has been slow to understand is that by going after Julian under the Trump administration, they went after him as a journalist. They went after him in a way that they would be able to go after them next. And I think there hasn't been a proper realization of that. At least I haven't seen it in France, because if there was a proper understanding of that, which maybe the legal departments understand, but there's not the political and cultural understanding around that, then Julian's case would be front page all the time. Well, this is the claim that the United States put out as a talking point when WikiLeaks first published, but they've never been able to provide any evidence. In fact, when there has been court hearings and they've been under oath, they've had to admit, actually, they've found there's no basis on which they can make this claim. It is a public relations claim that unfortunately many repeat uncritically, and they don't actually even look at the US's own statements in courts that they can't back the claim. And in fact, what WikiLeaks did reveal was the specific killings of tens of thousands of civilian people killed by US military and in other attacks, specific instances of deaths committed by, by known people.
La publication de cette vidéo d'une bavure de l'armée américaine en Irak a fait entrer WikiLeaks sur la scène médiatique mondiale en 2010. WikiLeaks a publié ces dernières années des milliers de câbles diplomatiques pour montrer l'envers des négociations internationales, des données souvent traitées en partenariat avec des grands journaux internationaux.
None of them have been prosecuted, so it's a complete, it's a deflection, and it's a very cynical deflection. Well, there's no basis whatsoever. I mean, anyone who followed the Manning trial knows that Manning was arrested because she confessed, she spoke to someone who presented themselves as a journalist, but in fact was an informer of the FBI, and explained that she was the source of this material, and then that person turned her in.
Le jeune homme de 25 ans a déjà passé plus de 3 années en détention préventive, dont 9 mois de régime d'isolement strict. La peine qui lui a été infligée ce mercredi est la plus longue jamais ordonnée en matière de fuite de documents confidentiels. Le soldat était en effet jugé pour avoir volé et transmis plus de 700 000 documents diplomatiques et militaires confidentiels au site WikiLeaks, alors qu'il travaillait comme analyste du renseignement militaire à Bagdad en 2010.
WikiLeaks had nothing to do with her imprisonment, and there is no claim by the US government or anyone who has actually followed her case to suggest that WikiLeaks had anything to do with that. Well, it's incredibly important because Julian's case is representative of a bigger fight for truth and what happens to people who confront powerful actors with truth that is embarrassing or costs them their interests, their financial or reputational interests. And it's only one person. They have the truth, but then they receive a lot of punishment unless there is a robust system that can protect them, awareness that they're performing a public service. And that's what Julian did. He performed a public service and he's being punished for it. And what whistleblowers do, they actually embody what we want to see in a free democratic society, where you can speak the truth without being punished for it, and where you can hold power to account, and where the balances, the checks and balances actually function. And when whistleblowers or journalists are punished for it, that's a system that is not functioning. It is the opposite of functioning. It's completely dysfunctional.
Alors, la situation de Julian Assange est proprement inacceptable au nom des droits de l'homme. Mais pour une raison très simple, c'est un journaliste. C'est un journaliste et l'article 10 de la Charte des droits fondamentaux de l'Union européenne dit de manière parfaitement claire que la liberté de la presse, la liberté d'expression doit pouvoir s'exercer sans ingérence des pouvoirs publics. Il est enfermé d'une manière ou d'une autre depuis plus de 10 ans. Tout ça pourquoi ? Parce qu'il a montré, simplement montré, les images des exécutions sommaires opérées par l'armée américaine suite aux mensonges qui lui ont permis de déclencher une guerre en Irak.
Julian's a fighter, and he knows that he did the right thing, that he is being politically persecuted because he did the right thing, because he revealed wrongdoing, he revealed criminality at the highest level, he revealed war crimes. And he has faith that the awareness about his case, that his case is a case of political persecution, of persecuting a journalist for doing his job, that is ultimately what will change the tide. And I think there is growing public awareness. Julian was recently one of the 3 finalists for the Sakharov Prize by the European Parliament. I mean, this is the same person that the US wants to put in prison for 175 years. It is completely contradictory, right? Because that you can see from that contradiction how this is such a political case, right? I joined Julian's legal team in 2011, and over the years, I got to know Julian as a person and fell in love with him. In 2015, we became a couple. We have 2 children. They were born in 2017 and 2019. And we got married in March this year after a long fight with the prison authorities, but we finally managed. And he's the most amazing man I've ever met. He's an incredible, very caring, incredibly loving, caring, intelligent man. And he's also a freedom fighter.